Colonel Harrison Burke stood on the hard stand at RAF Alconbury on a gray August afternoon in 1943, looking at what remained of a bomber that was supposed to save the 8th Air Force. Smoke still rose from the No. 3 engine. Hydraulic fluid pooled beneath the right wing. 247 bullet holes stitched across the fuselage like some terrible embroidery of war. The pilot climbed down from the cockpit, slowly, each movement careful, like a man who had just discovered his body still worked. Captain Robert Mitchell, 26 years old, face streaked with oil and sweat, and something that might have been tears or might have been just the condensation from breathing pure oxygen at 20,000 feet for 6 hours straight. Burke had known Mitchell for 8 months, had watched him fly 22 missions over Germany, had seen him come back when half his friends didn't, had watched this Ohio farm boy become one of the best bomber pilots in the European theater. But today, Burke needed something more than skill. He needed truth. "Captain, your assessment." Mitchell looked at the aircraft behind him, at the twin 50 caliber guns mounted under the nose in that revolutionary chin turret, at the extra dorsal turret behind the radio room, at all 16 machine guns that were supposed to change everything. He looked at the scorched gun barrels, at the holes in the wing where German 20mm cannon shells had punched through, at the empty spaces in the formation where the other bombers had pulled away, gotten lighter, gotten faster, left Hedgehog behind to fight alone. 3 words came out of his mouth. 3 words that would kill a $5.6 million program. "It can't keep up." Burke nodded slowly, wrote something on his clipboard, looked back at the damaged bomber, and then at the exhausted crew climbing out behind Mitchell. Every one of them pale, every one of them shaking. The colonel said one more thing before he walked away. "Get some rest, Captain. You just ended a dream. But you might have started something bigger." Mitchell didn't understand what that meant. Not yet. He wouldn't understand for another 4 months when engineers would discover that his failure had saved thousands of lives. But to understand how 3 words could kill a dream and birth a revolution, you have to go back. Back to before the smoke and bullets. Back to a wheat farm in Ohio where a mother made her son promise something he wasn't sure he could keep. The Mitchell family farm sat on 200 acres of good Ohio soil just outside Dayton. Wheat, mostly some corn, a vegetable garden that Eleanor Mitchell tended like it was holy ground. The house was white clapboard that needed painting. The barn was red and solid. The field stretched out to a line of oak trees that had been there longer than America itself. Robert Mitchell. Everyone called him Rob, was the youngest of 4 sons, 24 years old that spring. The other 3 brothers had married, moved to their own places. Left Rob to help his father work the land and dream about something else. He dreamed about engineering, about going to Ohio State and learning to design things. Aircraft maybe, or automobiles, or bridges. Anything that required taking something apart, understanding how it worked, making it better. His hands always had grease under the fingernails from working on the tractor, from taking apart the engine and putting it back together better than it was before, from fixing things that other people said couldn't be fixed. His father, Samuel Mitchell, had served in the First World War, had been gassed at Belleau Wood in 1918, and come home with lungs that never quite worked right. You could hear him wheezing from across the field on hot days, could hear him cough at night through the thin walls of the farmhouse, could hear in every breath the price he'd paid for something called glory. Samuel didn't talk much about the war, but when he did, his message was clear. "War's not glory, son. It's mud and screaming and watching your friends die in ways that'll wake you up for the rest of your life." Rob believed him, had no intention of ever putting on a uniform, had plans for college, for engineering, for a life that didn't involve anyone trying to kill him. Then December 7th happened. Rob was at church that Sunday morning. The whole family was. Methodist church in town, same pew they'd sat in for 20 years. Reverend Patterson was halfway through a sermon about loving your neighbor when someone burst through the doors. The Japanese just bombed Pearl Harbor. "We're at war." The church went silent. Then everyone started talking at once. Men stood up, women gasped, children asked questions nobody could answer yet. Rob looked at his father, saw the old man's face go pale, saw him grip the pew in front of them with both hands like he was holding himself up. Samuel looked at his youngest son and said something that Rob would remember forever. "They're gonna need you, Robbie, all of you. This one's gonna be different." Rob enlisted the next morning, December 8th, 1941, for the shock had even worn off. before he'd really thought about what it meant. His mother walked him to the recruiting station in Dayton. Eleanor Mitchell was 52 years old, had raised 4 sons and buried 2 daughters who died as babies, had worked the farm beside her husband for 30 years, had never complained, never cried where anyone could see, never showed anything but strength. But she held Rob's hand as they walked, something she hadn't done since he was maybe 7 years old. Her hand was calloused from work, warm, strong. At the door of the recruiting office, she stopped, reached into her apron pocket and pulled out something she'd carried from home. Her father's pocket watch, brass-dented old. It had belonged to her father who had carried it through the Civil War. Had been at Gettysburg at Antietam at Appomattox. Had somehow survived when so many others didn't. She pressed it into Rob's palm. The metal was warm from being against her body. The watch still ticked, still kept time like it had for 80 years. "Come home, Robbie. Promise me you'll come home." Rob closed his fingers around the watch, felt its weight, felt its warmth, felt all the history it carried. "I promise, Mom." She nodded, squeezed his hand once more. Then she let go and walked away. Didn't look back, couldn't let him see her cry. Rob went inside and signed papers that would change his life forever. They made him a pilot. Turned out he had a feel for it. The same instinct that let him take apart a tractor engine and put it back together better translated to understanding how an aircraft wanted to fly. The B-17 Flying Fortress became his aircraft. 4 Wright Cyclone engines. Wingspan wider than the barn back home. 10-man crew. Designed to carry bombs deep into enemy territory and fight its way back home through hell itself. Rob was good at it, natural, got promoted to captain, got assigned to the 92nd Bomb Group, got shipped to England in early 1943 with a crew he'd trained with for months. His co-pilot was David Walsh, Irish kid from Boston, 24 years old, who never stopped talking and could tell a joke in the middle of a flak barrage. Walsh chewed gum constantly, went through 5 packs a day, said it kept his hands from shaking. The chin turret gunner would eventually be Sergeant Tommy Hayes, Pennsylvania coal miner's son, 29 years old, who'd spent his whole life underground and now spent his time in the sky. Tommy was quiet, methodical, strong as an ox from years of swinging a pickaxe. The top turret gunner was Ray Cooper, Iowa farm kid 22 who hummed hymns while he loaded ammunition belts. Ray had never been more than 50 miles from home before the war. Now he was 6,000 miles away shooting at Germans over France. The waist gunners were Marcus Bell and Jimmy Ford. Bell was a mechanic from Detroit. Ford was a college dropout from California who joined up to prove something to his father. They played cards before every mission. Loser bought drinks if they made it back. The tail gunner was Lyle Henderson, oldest man on the crew at 31, married 2 kids back in Michigan. Henderson was calm under fire, never raised his voice, just did his job and kept them alive. The radio operator was Eddie Santos, Brooklyn kid 23 who could fix anything electronic and knew every baseball statistic from the last 10 years. They were a good crew, brothers, family in a way that only combat makes possible. And one by one, Rob watched crews just like his disappear. By spring 1943, the 8th Air Force was dying. The numbers told the story. 50% of bomber crews didn't survive to 25 missions. 25 was the magic number. 25 missions and you could go home. You'd done your part, earned your ticket back to the world. Most men never saw it. They died over Hamburg, over Schweinfurt, over Bremen, died when 88mm flak shells burst at altitude and sent shrapnel through aluminum skin like it was paper, died when Messerschmitt 109S and Focke-Wulf 190S came screaming out of the sun at 400 miles per hour with 20mm cannons firing, died before they ever reached the target, died before they could drop their bombs, died knowing they'd failed. The worst part was knowing why. Everyone knew why. The P-47 Thunderbolts were good fighters. Tough, heavily armed, could take punishment, but they didn't have the range. Could escort the bombers to the French coast, maybe 100 miles into Germany, if they were lucky and the wind was right. Then they had to turn back. Fuel tanks empty. Bombers on their own. That's when the Luftwaffe struck. German fighter tactics were brutally effective. No fancy dogfighting, no showing off, just cold calculated murder. They came from 12 o'clock high, straight ahead nose to nose where the B-17's defensive guns couldn't track them. 400 miles per hour closing speed, 20-millimeter cannon shells that could punch through the cockpit and kill both pilots before the top turret gunner could even swing his guns around. The waist gunners were useless. Wrong angle. The tail gunner was facing the wrong direction entirely. The top turret could engage, but not fast enough. It was slaughter. Mechanical, efficient, terrible. Rob Mitchell flew his first mission in February 1943. Target was Bremen, ball-bearing factories, critical to the German war machine. They lost 6 bombers from their group alone. 60 men, just gone. Rob's best friend from training, Lieutenant Charlie Peterson, flew right wing that day. Another Ohio boy, kid who'd grown up 20 miles from Rob's farm. They'd played baseball together in high school, had both enlisted the same day. Charlie made it through the Bremen mission, made it through 5 more, then Hamburg. Story Spike 1, Charlie Peterson mission, 18, Hamburg, March 4th, 1943. Rob was flying left wing when it happened, close enough to see everything, too close to help. Charlie's bomber, they called it Lucky Strike because Charlie was always lucky, at cards took a direct flak hit. Not shrapnel, not a near miss. Direct hit. 88-millimeter high explosive shell right through the bomb bay. The bomber was still carrying its full load, 500-pound bombs, thousands of pounds of high explosive. The detonation was instantaneous. 1 second Charlie was there waving from his cockpit window with that crooked Ohio grin of his. The next second just fire. Orange and black and pieces of aluminum tumbling through the sky like leaves in autumn wind. Rob didn't hear the explosion, too loud, too close. But he felt it. The concussive wave rocked his aircraft. Hot air rushed past. The entire bomber shuddered. Then silence on the radio, where Charlie's voice used to be. 10 men gone. Just like that. Friends, brothers, Ohioans who'd never see the wheat fields again. No parachutes, no survivors, just fire and smoke and falling metal. That night, Rob sat in the barracks holding Charlie's chess set. They'd been playing a long game match that had lasted weeks between missions. Charlie had been winning. King and 2 pawns against king and rook. Charlie always said the same thing. Pawns win games, Rob. Never forget the little guys. Rob never played chess again. But he kept the set, kept it in his footlocker beside his mother's pocket watch. Kept it to remember. That's why 2 months later, when they asked for volunteers for something new, something dangerous, something that might save the little guys, Rob's hand went up first. If you served, if you or someone in your family served with the 8th Air Force during World War II, we want to hear from you. Share their story in the comments below. What did they carry with them into combat? What promises did they make to the people they loved? We read every single comment. Your family's stories matter. They're part of why we tell these forgotten histories. They're part of what makes America great. Act 2, The Hunter. 800 miles from Rob Mitchell's barracks in England, another pilot was waking up to war. Oberleutnant Friedrich Kemper, everyone called him Fritz, opened his eyes at 5:30 in the morning on May 29, 1943, to the smell of ersatz coffee. Not real coffee, burned acorns and chicory, and whatever else the quartermaster could scrounge. Nothing like the real thing. Bitter, metallic, German. Fritz was 28 years old, had an engineering degree from Stuttgart University. Before the war, he designed machine parts for Mercedes-Benz. Precision work, clean work, work that didn't involve killing. Now he killed Americans for a living. 23 confirmed victories. 23 times he'd lined up another human being in his gun sight and pressed the trigger. 23 times he'd watched an aircraft spiral down trailing smoke and fire. 23 times he tried not to think about the men inside. He kept a photograph in his flight suit pocket. Not of Hitler, not of military glory, not of himself in uniform looking heroic. His mother and younger sister standing in front of their house in Stuttgart. The photograph was 2 months old. The house it showed no longer existed. Allied bombing raid on March 15th had reduced it to rubble. His mother, Greta Kemper, had survived. Pulled from the wreckage by neighbors. Broken arm cuts, bruises, but alive. His sister Anna, age 17, had not. They found her body 3 days later, still in her nightgown, still holding the book she'd been reading when the bombs fell. Fritz fought for them now, for what remained of home. Not for Hitler, not for the Reich, not for Nazi ideology that he'd never believed in anyway. He fought because someone had to, and if he didn't, another German pilot would. A true believer, a fanatic who wouldn't hesitate, who wouldn't feel guilt, who would kill every American without mercy or second thought. At least Fritz tried to make it quick, aimed for engines when he could instead of cockpits, let damaged bombers limp away if they'd already jettisoned their bombs, tried to tell himself there was honor in this, tried to believe it. He kept a diary, forbidden by regulations, could be court-martialed if anyone found it, but he kept it anyway hidden in his footlocker beneath spare socks and photographs. Last night's entry written by candlelight, after dinner. How many more must die before this madness ends? The Americans keep coming. We keep killing them. They keep coming anyway. They are brave, braver than we are. We fight because we must. They fight because they choose to. There is a difference. God forgive me for what I will do tomorrow. Today was tomorrow. Fritz stood up, washed his face in cold water from a basin, looked at himself in a cracked mirror, saw a face that looked older than 28, saw eyes that had seen too much. He touched the photograph of his mother and sister, said a prayer in German, Vater unser im Himmel, our Father who art in heaven. Same prayer in any language, same plea for mercy, same hope that maybe somehow this would all end. Then he walked to his aircraft. 4 months earlier, while Rob Mitchell was mourning Charlie Peterson and Fritz Kemper was writing in his forbidden diary, 2 engineers at Wright Field in Ohio were trying to solve an impossible problem. Colonel Albert Chen sat in an office that smelled like cigarette smoke and desperation, staring at casualty reports that got worse every week. February 1943. The numbers were brutal. 600 bombers lost since January. 6,000 men, dead, captured, missing. Most of them dead. 40% of all bomber losses came from one specific tactic: frontal attacks. German fighters diving from 12 o'clock high nose to nose where B-17 defensive guns had a blind spot, where the closing speed was too fast for turret gunners to track, where 20-millimeter cannons could pump shells through the cockpit before American gunners could even fire back. The math was simple and terrible. Without long-range fighter escorts, the bombers were defenseless. And escort fighters didn't have the range. Not yet. P-51 Mustangs with drop tanks were still 2 years away from operational deployment. Someone had to protect the bombers now. Today, not in 2 years. Major Richard Lowry Chen's deputy had been working the problem for weeks. Brilliant engineer, creative thinker, man who'd designed parts of the Norden bomb site and improved the oxygen system on the B-24 Liberator. He walked into Chen's office with a folder full of sketches and calculations and an idea that sounded insane. What if we don't wait for fighter escorts? What if we turn a bomber into a fighter? Chen looked up from the casualty reports, looked at Lowry like he'd lost his mind. Explain. Lowry spread out the sketches, showed calculations, pointed to blueprints. Take a standard B-17, strip out the bomb bay, turn it into an ammunition bunker. Add guns, lots of guns. Specifically add a chin turret under the nose. Twin 50 caliber machine guns hydraulically powered, designed to engage frontal attacks. Add a second dorsal turret. Double the waist guns. Redesign the tail turret. Add armor plating. Make it a flying fortress that actually lives up to the name. Chen studied the sketches, did the math in his head, looked at the weight calculations and frowned. It'll be 4,000 pounds heavier than a standard B-17. Lowry nodded. Won't be able to carry bombs, but it doesn't need to. Its job is to protect the bombers that do carry bombs. Stay with the formation the entire mission. Draw fire. Kill German fighters. Give the bomb-laden B-17's a chance to reach the target and get home. Chen lit a cigarette, stared at the ceiling, thought about 600 bombers lost, 6,000 men dead. That's either genius or the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Let's find out which. 2 weeks later, Douglas Aircraft received a contract marked Top Secret. Build 12 aircraft, designation YB-40. Budget $5.6 million. The flying destroyer was born. The engineers at Douglas Aircraft worked fast. February to April, 8 weeks, to completely redesign a B-17 flying fortress into something that had never existed before. They ripped out the bomb bay entirely, turned that space into a massive ammunition storage area. 11,000 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition, enough to fight for hours without reloading, enough to turn the sky into a curtain of lead. The revolutionary chin turret went under the nose. Twin 50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns, same weapons that armed fighters and tanks and everything else the American military needed to kill with. Hydraulically powered, fully traversable, designed specifically to eliminate the 12 o'clock high blind spot that German pilots exploited. Behind the cockpit, they installed a second dorsal turret, right behind the radio room, overlapping fields of fire with the main top turret. Double the coverage, double the death. The waist guns doubled from 2 to 4, extra cheek guns mounted in the nose windows. The tail turret completely redesigned with the new Cheyenne model that offered better visibility and more protection for the gunner. Then came the armor, steel plating around every gunner position, reinforced bulkheads, thicker glass in the turrets, protection that might keep the crew alive long enough to actually use all those guns. The result was magnificent and terrible. 16 50 caliber machine guns, 4,000 pounds heavier than a standard B-17, $467,000 per aircraft, nearly double the cost of a regular flying Fortress. On paper, it looked unstoppable. In reality, it would be one of the biggest failures in Air Force history, but that failure would save thousands of lives. April 1943. All 12 YB-40S were crated and shipped to England, to RAF Alconbury, to the 92nd Bomb Group, to Rob Mitchell and his crew. First sight, the ground crew saw them first, taxiing in from the transport aircraft. 12 B-17's that looked almost normal until you looked closer and saw the extra turrets, the additional guns, the heavier stance. Word spread fast. Something new, something different, something that might actually help. Rob Mitchell stood on the hard stand with his crew when the first YB-40 rolled past. They all just stared. David Walsh whistled low. "Captain, that thing's got more guns than a battleship." Tommy Hayes walked up to touch it, ran his hand over one of the chin turret barrels. Coal miner's hands scarred and strong, touching American steel that might keep him alive. Gonna make those Krauts think twice. The crew they eventually drew was aircraft number 425738. Standard B-17 airframe modified beyond recognition. They named it Hedgehog. Painted nose art showed an angry hedgehog bristling with spines, except the spines were machine gun barrels. Rob climbed into the cockpit for the first time on May 15th. 3 weeks of training flights before the first combat mission. 3 weeks to learn how this beast flew. It flew like a pregnant elephant. The weight was immediately obvious. Every control input took more effort. The yoke felt heavy. The aircraft wanted to wallow, not soar, wanted to stay on the ground where it belonged. Takeoff was an exercise in faith. Rob pushed the throttles to full power. 4 Wright Cyclone engines screamed, but Hedgehog barely moved, accelerated slowly. It up runway like it was starving. Walsh called out speeds, 80 knots, 100, 120. "Rotate speed, Captain." Rob pulled back on the yoke. The tail lifted reluctantly. The main wheels stayed glued to concrete. More throttle, more back pressure. "Come on, you beautiful monster. Fly." Finally, after what felt like miles of runway, Hedgehog staggered into the air, climbed like it was pushing through syrup. Every foot of altitude earned through engine power and pilot will. A standard B-17 could reach 20,000 feet in about 25 minutes. Hedgehog took 48, nearly double. Nearly twice as long climbing through the altitude where German fighters waited. But once they reached altitude and Tess fired all 16 guns over the English Channel, even Rob had to admit it was spectacular. The noise was incredible. A continuous thunder. Tracers filled the sky like deadly fireworks. British observers on the ground watching through binoculars couldn't believe what they were seeing. Rob's assessment in his logbook that night was honest. He'd promised Colonel Burke the truth. Always the truth. Aircraft extremely heavy, climb rate unacceptable, maneuverability poor, control sluggish. But firepower is magnificent. Defensive capability possibly revolutionary. If we can maintain formation speed and altitude, this might work. Emphasis on if, 2 words that would haunt him. If we can keep up. May 29, 1943. The test was over. Time for the real thing. Target Saint-Nazaire, France. Submarine pens. Reinforced concrete bunkers where German U-boats refueled before heading into the Atlantic to sink Allied convoys. 168 17s would participate. 4 of them were WWII B-40Ms, 4 flying destroyers that would either prove the concept or die trying. Rob Mitchell wound his mother's pocket watch that morning, listened to it tick, thought about the promise he'd made, thought about Charlie Peterson's chess set in his footlocker, thought about all the crews depending on those 16 guns to keep them alive. 800 miles away, Fritz Kemper touched his photograph, said his prayer, climbed into Red 7 and took off to hunt Americans. Neither man knew that in 6 hours they would meet. Neither man knew that their encounter would change the war. Neither man knew that failure and success were sometimes the same thing. The engines roared. The bombers lifted into English sky. History was about to be written in fire and blood, in the courage of men who fought for different flags but shared the same fear. The test had begun. The briefing room at RAF Alconbury smelled like every briefing room in every airbase across England that spring. Coffee gone cold in tin cups. Cigarette smoke thick enough to cut with a knife. Sweat and fear and the particular odor of men who knew they might die today but had stopped talking about it. 6 o'clock in the morning, May 29th, 1943. The room was packed with pilots and navigators and bombardiers, all of them watching the intelligence officer standing beside a map covered with a curtain. Rob Mitchell sat in the third row with David Walsh. Behind them, Tommy Hayes and Ray Cooper. The whole crew present. Everyone wanted to hear the target. Everyone wanted to know how bad it would be. The intelligence officer, a major whose name nobody remembered because he never flew the missions himself, pulled back the curtain with theatrical flourish. The map showed France. A red ribbon stretched from England across the Channel to the French coast, to a city called Saint-Nazaire. Gentlemen, your target is the submarine pens at Saint-Nazaire. Groans throughout the room. Everyone knew Saint-Nazaire. Everyone had heard the stories. Reinforced concrete bunkers 20 feet thick. German U-boats sheltering inside like wolves in a cave. Flak batteries surrounding the pens like a fence of death. The pens had survived dozens of raids. Bombs just bounced off that concrete. But High Command kept sending bombers anyway. Had to try. Had to do something about those U-boats sinking convoys in the Atlantic. Sinking the ships bringing food and weapons and fuel to England. Starving Britain into submission. The major continued with numbers that made Rob's stomach tighten. 168 B-17CS will participate. Expected enemy resistance is rated as severe. Flak will be intense and accurate. German fighter interception is anticipated before, during, and after the target run. More groans. Severe meant they'd lose bombers. Intense flak meant the sky would be black with explosions. Anticipated fighter interception meant the Luftwaffe knew they were coming and would be ready. Then the major pointed to 4 specific positions on the formation chart. These 4 aircraft are our new YB-40 gunships. Their mission is to protect the formation, engage enemy fighters, draw fire away from the bomb-carrying aircraft. Every eye in the room turned to look at Rob Mitchell and the 3 other YB-40 captains. The attention felt heavy, the weight of expectation, the hope that maybe finally something would help. The YB-40S will fly the most exposed positions in the formation. Purple Heart corner, right and left rear quadrants, where German fighters typically initiate their attacks. Rob felt Walsh shift beside him, heard him whisper under his breath, "Of course they put us in the kill zone. Why would they waste a perfectly good death trap?" Colonel Burke stood up from the front row, turned to face the assembled crews. His face was grave. He'd been flying bombers since North Africa, had lost friends, had watched boys burn, had sent men to D knowing some wouldn't come back. He looked directly at Rob. The YB-40 program is experimental. This is its first combat test. Every aircraft in this room is depending on those 4 gunships to do what they were designed to do. Protect the formation. Kill German fighters. Give our boys a fighting chance. Burke paused. Let the words sink in. If this works, it could change the air war. If it doesn't, well, we'll learn something either way. Questions. Nobody had questions. What was there to ask? The mission was the mission. You flew it or you didn't. You lived or you died. Questions didn't change anything. Dismissed. Engines start at 1300 hours. Good hunting, gentlemen. The crews filed out into the gray English morning. Some went to the mess hall for breakfast. they probably wouldn't taste. Some went to the chapel. Some wrote letters they hoped they wouldn't have to mail. Rob went to his aircraft. Pattern interrupt the cost of war. To understand what Rob Mitchell was about to face, you need to understand what had been happening in the skies over Europe for the past 6 months. Since January 1943, the 8th Air Force had been hemorrhaging bombers and crews at a rate that was mathematically unsustainable. The numbers told a story of systematic destruction. 600 bombers lost. That's not just aircraft. That's 6,000 men, 10 crew members per bomber, boys from farms and cities, college students and factory workers, sons and brothers and fathers. Americans who climbed into their aircraft knowing the odds and went anyway because someone had to. The worst single mission would come later that August. Schweinfurt and Regensburg. 60 bombers shot down in one day. 600 men. Gone. Just like that. Some killed instantly by flak. Some shot to pieces by German fighters. Some burned alive in their aircraft. Some jumped without parachutes rather than burn. Some captured and sent to prison camps. Some never found at all. But even before Schweinfurt, the loss rate was staggering. 40% of all bomber casualties came from one specific German tactic: frontal attacks. The German fighter pilots, the Luftwaffe, had figured out the B-17's weak spot. For all its guns, for all its reputation as a flying fortress, it had a blind spot, 12 o'clock high, straight ahead and slightly above. If a German fighter came diving from that angle nose to nose, the closure rate was over 400 miles per hour. Both aircraft approaching each other at more than 200 miles per hour each. The combined speed meant the engagement lasted maybe 3 seconds. 3 seconds for the German pilot to aim his 20mm cannons and fire. 3 seconds for the B-17's defensive gunners to react. The math didn't work. The top turret gunner could swing his guns forward, but not fast enough. The waist gunners had the wrong angle. The tail gunner faced backward. The nose guns, when B-17's had them, were flexible handheld weapons that couldn't track a target moving that fast. By the time American gunners could engage, the German fighter was already past, already through the formation, already pulling up for another run. And the B-17's cockpit was full of 20mm holes and dead pilots. Entire formations were being decimated. Entire bomb groups taking 50% casualties. Boys who'd been playing baseball 6 months ago were dying and burning aluminum boxes over Germany. The YB-40's chin turret was designed to solve exactly this problem. Twin 50 caliber machine guns mounted under the nose, hydraulically powered, fully aimable, designed to engage frontal attacks with overwhelming firepower. On paper, it was brilliant. In 90 minutes, Rob Mitchell would discover that paper and reality lived in different worlds. Rob Mitchell walked around Hedgehog slowly in the early afternoon light, touched each gun barrel with his bare hand, a ritual he'd learned from Charlie Peterson. Talk to your guns. They'll talk back when you need them. The chin turret guns were cold to the touch, steel and machinery waiting to become instruments of death. Rob ran his hand along the twin barrels and thought about the German pilots who would face them today. Thought about men like himself, men with families, men who didn't want to die. His crew prepared their own ways. Tommy Hayes loaded the first ammunition belt into the chin turret. 500 rounds linked together. Heavy brass and copper. Each round capable of punching through armor plate. Each round someone's death if it hit flesh instead of metal. Tommy chambered a round, cycled the action, whispered a prayer his mother had taught him back in Pennsylvania. Lord, make me good enough to do this, and forgive me for what I'm about to do. David Walsh sat in the co-pilot seat, running through his pre-flight checklist for the 3rd time. Everything had to be perfect. Fuel mixture, prop pitch, generator settings, everything. He chewed gum mechanically. 5 pieces at once, jaw working like a machine, hands not shaking as long as he kept them busy. Ray Cooper hummed hymns while loading ammunition into the top turret. Amazing Grace, How Great Thou Art. Songs from the Methodist Church back in Iowa. Songs his grandmother had sung. Songs that made him feel like maybe God was watching. Maybe someone cared. Marcus Bell and Jimmy Ford played one last hand of cards at the waist gun positions. Poker, 5-card draw, same game they played before every mission. Loser book but drinks tonight, if there was a tonight. Lyle Henderson sat in the tail turret writing a note to his wife. Not a letter, just a note. Sarah, I love you. Tell the kids their daddy thought about them right before. He folded it, put it in his pocket, wouldn't mail it, would save it for the next mission, and the next. Would keep writing notes he never sent until he finished 25 missions and could go home and tell her in person. Eddie Santos checked the radio equipment one more time, made sure the frequencies were set, made sure the emergency channels worked, made sure that if they had to call for help, someone would hear. Rob's final act before boarding was the same as always. He pulled out his mother's pocket watch, wound it carefully, listened to it tick. Each tick was another second alive. Each tick was another heartbeat closer to home. He slipped it back into his flight suit pocket, climbed into the left seat, looked at Walsh. Ready? Walsh stopped chewing for a second, looked at his captain, managed a crooked grin. Ready as I'll ever be. Let's go kill some Nazis. Fritz Kemper performed his own rituals in the pre-dawn darkness of Jagdgeschwader 26's airfield in northern France. The photograph came out first. His mother and sister, Greta and Anna. One still alive in the ruins of Stuttgart, one dead under those ruins. Fritz touched Anna's face in the photograph. 17 years old forever. Would never turn 18. Would never graduate. Would never marry or have children or grow old. He said his prayer in German, the Lord's Prayer. Same words Christians had been saying for 2,000 years. Same plea for mercy and forgiveness. Same hope that maybe killing could be justified if the cause was right. Fritz wasn't sure the cause was right anymore. Wasn't sure it ever had been. But he was sure of one thing. If he didn't fly today, someone else would. Someone who wouldn't hesitate. Someone who would kill every American without mercy or doubt. At least Fritz tried to make it quick. He climbed into Red 7, his Focke-Wulf 190. The cockpit smelled like leather and oil and cordite from yesterday's combat. The seat was worn to the shape of his body. The controls were familiar as his own hands. This aircraft had kept him alive through 49 combat missions. He trusted it more than he trusted most people. His wingman Feldwebel Otto Braun was already in his aircraft. Otto was 34 years old, had 3 children back in Bavaria, 15 confirmed kills. Good pilot, steady, reliable. The kind of man you wanted on your wing when things went bad. The radio crackled. Otto's voice. Ready, Fritz. Fritz keyed his microphone. Ready, my friend. Stay tight. Come home alive. You too, Fritz. See you back here for dinner. Fritz thought about dinner. Thought about the thin soup and black bread that pass for food these days. Thought about real coffee instead of burnt acorns. Thought about his mother's cooking before the war. Before everything changed. Then he pushed those thoughts away. Focused on the mission. Focused on survival. The tower called. American bomber formation detected. Large rate inbound. Estimated 100+ aircraft. Intercept and engage. Fritz started his engine. The BMW radio roared to life. 1,200 horsepower. Enough power to push the FW190 to 400 miles per hour. Enough power to catch any bomber. Enough power to kill. 18 German fighters took off into the morning sky. 18 hunters rising to meet the bombers. 18 men who would try to stop the raid. Some would succeed. Some would fail. Some would die. Fritz didn't know yet that today he would meet Rob Mitchell. Didn't know that today would change everything he thought he knew about courage and honor in the enemy. Didn't know that 45 years from now, he would drink coffee with the man he was about to try to kill. All he knew was the mission. Find the bombers, stop them, survive. 1347 hours. 168 B-17 engines roared to life across RAF Alconbury. The sound was like thunder. Like the earth itself was angry. 4 Wright Cyclone engines per bomber. 672 engines total. Enough horsepower to light a city. Enough fury to shake the ground. Rob Mitchell sat in Hedgehog's cockpit running through the checklist with Walsh. Every switch, every gauge, every control, everything had to be perfect because there was no room for error at 20,000 feet over enemy territory. Fuel mixture set, check. Prop pitch full forward, check. Generators online, check. Hydraulic pressure good, check. Walsh looked over at Rob. Captain, we're ready. Rob pushed the throttle forward. 4 engines responded. The sound was incredible, even through the headset. Deep, powerful. American machinery doing what American machinery did best. Working. But Hedgehog barely moved. The extra 4,000 pounds of guns and ammunition and armor made everything harder. The aircraft wanted to stay on the ground, wanted to be a stationary gun platform instead of a flying one. Rob added more throttle, more power. The engine screamed. Hedgehog began to roll, slowly, too slowly, eating up the taxiway like a fat man walking uphill. Other B-17's were taking off, standard bombers, lighter, faster, climbing quickly into the English sky. But the 4 YB-40s moved like pregnant elephants, ungainly, heavy, struggling. Rob's turn at the runway. He lined up, pushed the throttles all the way forward. Maximum power, everything the engines had. Hedgehog accelerated. Slowly, the runway markers passed. 500 feet, 1,000 feet, 1,500 feet. Most B-17's were airborne by now. Walsh called out speeds, 80 knots, 100, 120. Rotate speed, Captain. Rob pulled back on the yoke, felt resistance. The tail wanted to stay down. The weight was wrong, the balance was wrong, everything was wrong. More back pressure. Come on, you beautiful monster. Fly for me. The tail lifted, the nose came up, but the main wheels stayed glued to the runway. 2,000 feet gone, 2,500. How much runway was left? Then finally, grudgingly, Hedgehog staggered into the air. Barely flying, barely climbing, clawing for altitude like a wounded bird. The climb rate was pitiful, 200 feet per minute. A standard B-17 could manage 1,000 feet per minute. Hedgehog took forever. Walsh looked at the altimeter, looked at Rob. Didn't say anything. Didn't need to. They both knew. This thing's a pig, Captain. Rob nodded. Yeah, but let's see if it's a pig with teeth. By 15:30 hours, the formation was assembled over the English Channel. 168 bombers in perfect combat box formation, staggered altitudes, overlapping fields of fire, designed to concentrate defensive firepowers against attacking fighters. Hedgehog took its assigned position. Right rear quadrant, Purple Heart corner, the spot where German fighters traditionally struck first. The killing ground, the place where the weakest bombers died. Rob looked out at the formation, at all those silver aircraft reflecting afternoon sunlight, at all those crews depending on Hedgehog to do its job. He keyed the intercom. All positions check in. One by one his crew responded. Chin turret ready. Top turret ready. Waist guns ready. Tail gun ready. Radio ready. Everyone was ready. Ready to find out if this would work. Ready to fight. Ready to die if necessary. The formation turned south. Headed for France. Headed for combat. Headed for a date with German fighters who were already climbing to intercept. From 28,000 feet, Fritz Kemper watched the American bomber formation through binoculars. They looked like a swarm of silver bees. Geometric. Perfect. Beautiful in a terrible way. Each bomber carrying 10 men and thousands of pounds of bombs, coming to destroy German cities, coming to kill German civilians, coming to burn what little remained of his homeland. Fritz counted aircraft, lost count at 100. Didn't matter. Too many. Far too many. 18 German fighters against more than 100 bombers. The math was bad, but math was all they had. Math and courage, and the knowledge that if they didn't stop some of these bombers, German cities would burn tonight. German families would die. Maybe Fritz's mother in Stuttgart would be next. He studied the formation through his binoculars, looked for weak spots, looked for stragglers, looked for anything that could be exploited. Then he saw it. Rear right quadrant. One bomber that looked different. Extra turrets, more guns visible. The silhouette was wrong for a standard B-17. Fritz keyed his radio. Achtung, rear right bomber appears to be modified, heavily armed, multiple turrets visible. Recommend caution. His squadron leader, Hauptmann Werner Schroer, responded. Understood. All aircraft maintain formation. Coordinated attack on my mark. But Lieutenant Hans Muller, 21 years old with 4 kills, and too much confidence broke formation early. Fritz saw him dive, watched him accelerate toward the bombers. Fritz shouted into his radio, "Hans, wait. Coordinated attack. Do not engage alone." But Muller was already committed, already diving, already convinced that he could take out that strange bomber before it could react. Young, eager, stupid. Fritz watched what happened next with a sinking feeling in his stomach. Muller came in from 12 o'clock high, the classic Luftwaffe frontal attack. 400 miles per hour, nose to nose with the strange bomber, closing distance at terrifying speed, 800 meters, 600, 400. Fritz watched through his binoculars, watched Muller line up his shot, watched him prepare to fire. Then Fritz saw something he'd never seen before. The bomber's nose erupted with fire, twin streams of tracers reaching out, reaching up, the new chin turret engaging, firing, creating a wall of lead where none should exist. Muller fired his cannons, 20-millimeter shells streaking toward the bomber. Some hit. Fritz saw the impacts, saw pieces fly off the bomber's wing. But Muller's aircraft flew straight into that curtain of defensive fire. 50 caliber rounds hammered his Focke-Wulf, hundreds of them, thousands. The combined fire of not just the chin turret, but the top turret, the waist guns, everything. 16 machine guns concentrated on one target. Fritz watched Muller's wings shred, watched hydraulic fluid spray, watched the FW-190 shudder and roll. Muller tried to pull up, tried to escape, but his aircraft wouldn't respond. Control surfaces destroyed, hydraulics gone. Just a metal coffin tumbling through the sky. The canopy blew off. Muller ejected, his parachute deployed, white silk against blue sky. He would live, would spend the rest of the war in a prisoner camp, but he would live. His aircraft continued down, tumbling, spinning, trailing smoke. Hit the ocean 40 seconds later with a splash that Fritz could see from 6,000 meters up. Fritz felt his hands shaking on the controls, felt his heart pounding, felt something he hadn't felt in 23 kills. Fear, not fear of death. He'd made peace with that possibility long ago. Fear of what that heavily armed bomber represented. Fear that the Americans had found a solution to the problem of defensive firepower. Fear that the easy kills were over. He keyed his radio. All aircraft break off frontal attacks. That bomber has twin guns under the nose. Approaching from 12 o'clock is suicide. We must coordinate. Multiple angles. Overwhelm their defensive fire. Ottobrand's voice came back. Acknowledge, Fritz. What's the plan? Fritz thought fast. Calculated angles and closure rates and fields of fire. Thought like the engineer he'd been before the war. Thought about how to kill that monster without dying in the attempt. 3 aircraft, 3 different approach vectors. High level, low. Simultaneous. Force them to split their fire. Some of us will get through. Schroer approved the plan. Execute. All aircraft form attack groups, 3 ship elements. Attack on my mark. Fritz positioned his element. Himself, Otto, and a young pilot named Dieter Koch. Good flyers, experienced, men who wouldn't panic. He watched the bomber formation, watched that heavily armed monster in the rear, thought about the men inside, Americans who'd volunteered to fly that death trap, Americans who knew they'd be targeted, Americans who did it anyway, brave bastards. Fritz had killed 23 Americans, but for the first time he truly respected them. He armed his weapons, checked his gun sight, prepared to add either number 24 or add himself to the list of dead German pilots. The tower called, bombers approaching initial point. Beginning bomb run, intercept now, Schroer gave the order. All aircraft attack for the fatherland. Fritz pushed his stick forward. Red 7 dove toward the bombers, toward the Americans, toward Rob Mitchell and Hedgehog in a moment that would define both their lives. Neither man knew they would meet again 45 years later over coffee. Neither man knew they would become friends. Neither man knew that this moment, this violence, this desperate attempt to kill each other would eventually lead to forgiveness and understanding and peace. All they knew was war. All they knew was duty. All they knew was that in the next 60 seconds, one of them might die. The dance of death had begun. 16:47 hours. The lead bombardier's voice crackled over the radio. Cold, professional, the voice of a man doing mathematics while people died around him. Bomb bay doors open, beginning final approach. Rob Mitchell watched the formation ahead. Watched bomb bay doors swing open on 164 B-17's. Dark rectangles and silver bellies. Each one about to release thousands of pounds of high explosive. Below them, St. Nazaire spread out like a toy city. The submarine pens were visible, even from 20,000 feet. Massive concrete structures, gray and ugly and supposedly indestructible. U-boats sheltered inside like sharks in a cave. Those U-boats were killing Allied convoys in the Atlantic, sinking the ships bringing food and fuel and hope to England. Today, America was trying to kill the sharks. Flak started bursting around the formation. German 88mm anti-aircraft guns firing from the ground. Each shell exploded into black smoke and shrapnel. Each explosion capable of tearing a bomber apart. The sky filled with deadly flowers blooming and fading. Hedgehog rocked from a near miss. The concussion wave hit like a physical blow. Rob fought the controls, kept the aircraft steady, kept it in formation. Walsh's voice was tight. "That was close, Captain." "They all are. Stay focused." Tommy Hayes in the chin turret called out fighters, bandits at 10 o'clock. 3 of them, coming in coordinated. Rob saw them. 3 Focke-Wulfs diving from different angles. High level low, forcing Hedgehog's gunners to split their fire. Smart tactics. Luftwaffe pilots learning, adapting. All gunners pick your targets. Don't waste ammunition. The 3 German fighters came in fast. Tommy engaged the one diving from 12 o'clock high. His twin 50s hammered. Tracers reached out. The German pilots saw the fire and broke off early. Pulled up hard. Didn't want to fly through that curtain of death. Ray Cooper in the top turret tracked the fighter coming in level. Fired a long burst. Saw his rounds walk across the sky toward the target. Saw some hit. Saw pieces fly off the German's wing. The fighter rolled away, trailing smoke. Lyle Henderson in the tail engaged the low attacker. Calm, methodical, squeezed off controlled bursts. The German pilot snap rolled and dove away. All 3 attacks broken up. All 3 German fighters disengaging. Hedgehog's firepower was working exactly as designed. Over the radio, other bomber crews were cheering. Hedgehog's tearing them up. "Look at that thing fight, give it them hell, boys." For 6 brutal minutes, the YB-40 performed its mission perfectly. German fighters came in. Hedgehog drove them off. The bomber formation stayed intact. Crews stayed alive. Rob felt something he hadn't felt in months. Hope. Maybe this would work. Maybe they'd found the solution. Maybe fewer boys would die. Then the bombardier called the words that would change everything. Bombs away. Bombs away. 164 B-17's released their bomb loads simultaneously. 500-pound bombs tumbled from open bay doors, fell toward the submarine pens below. 2 minutes of falling. 2 minutes for German gunners on the ground to track them, to realize death was coming, to run or pray or just wait. The bombs hit. Explosions rippled across St. Nazaire, orange and black, fire and smoke. The submarine pens disappeared in a cloud of destruction. Whether the bombs penetrated that 20-foot thick concrete didn't matter right now. What mattered was physics. Each bomber had just dropped between 4,000 and 6,000 pounds of ordnance. Instantly lighter, instantly faster, instantly more maneuverable. The formation began to climb. Standard procedure after bombs away. Get altitude. Get speed. Get away from the target in the flak and the fighters. Get home. Rob watched it happen. Watched the other bombers pull up. Watched them accelerate. Watched them gain 500 feet per minute while Hedgehog struggled to maintain level flight. Because Hedgehog hadn't dropped anything. Still carried 11,000 rounds of ammunition. 4,000 pounds that couldn't be jettisoned. Couldn't be released. Couldn't be gotten rid of. Rob pushed the throttles forward. Already at maximum power, but he pushed them harder anyway. Like willpower could overcome physics. Like determination could beat mathematics. The engine screamed. Gauges crept into the red zone. Cylinder head temperatures spiked. Oil pressure fluctuated. The right cyclones were being pushed beyond their design limits. Walsh watched the formation pull away. Watched the gap widen. 1 mile. 2 miles. 3 miles. "Captain, we're falling behind." Rob's jaw clenched. "I know. Engines are maxed. There's nothing more. The radio crackled. Other YB-40 pilots reporting the same problem. All four gunships falling behind. All four experiencing the same fatal flaw that nobody had predicted. YB-40 Delta reporting. Cannot maintain formation speed. Falling back. YB-40. Charlie here. Same problem. Formation pulling away. We're on our own. Colonel Burke's voice came over the radio. Strained, angry, desperate. YB-40 aircraft close up the formation. Repeat close up. Rob keyed his microphone. Hedgehog to lead. Negative, sir. Engines at maximum power. Cannot comply. We're too heavy. Silence on the radio. The kind of silence that meant everyone was thinking the same thing. The YB-40 concept had just failed. Failed in the worst possible way. Failed by proving itself unable to do the one thing it absolutely had to do. Stay with the formation. The bomber stream disappeared into the distance. 164 aircraft climbing towards safety. 4 YB-40s left behind. Alone, exposed, vulnerable. And from above, Fritz Kemper saw it happen. Saw the 4 heavy bombers lag behind. Saw them lose altitude. Saw them become separated from the protection of the formation. He keyed his radio. The gunships are falling behind. They cannot keep pace. Now is our chance. 10 Focke-Wulf 19s turned toward Hedgehog like wolves circling wounded prey. Act 5, 90 minutes of hell. 1653 hours. The death struggle began. The German fighters came from every direction. Not coordinated attacks now, just overwhelming numbers. High-low level from both sides. Constant pressure, constant threat. Trying to find the angle that would get through Hedgehog's defensive fire. Tommy Hayes in the chin turret fired until his barrels glowed red hot. Belt after belt of ammunition. Brass casings poured onto the floor around his feet, ankle deep. The turret filled with smoke and the smell of cordite. His shoulders bruised from the recoil, his ears ringing despite the headset. Bandit 12 o'clock high, engaging. The twin 50s hammered. Tracers reached out. The German fighter saw the fire and broke off. Pulled up hard. Another one. 11 o'clock level. Engaging. More fire. More tracers, more Germans pulling away rather than face that curtain of lead. But they kept coming, kept attacking, kept probing for weakness. Ray Cooper in the top turret swiveled constantly. Left, right, forward, back. Tracking targets. Firing. Tracking. Firing. His world narrowed to gun sight and triggers and German fighters that wanted to kill him. 3 o'clock high. Got him. No, he's breaking off. 9 o'clock low, firing. Jesus, they're everywhere. Marcus Bell and Jimmy Ford at the waist guns created a crossfire that forced German pilots to thread a needle of tracers. Some made it through, some didn't. One Focke-Wulf flew through their combined fire and came out the other side with its tail section shredded. Went into a spin. The pilot bailed out. Parachute blossomed white against blue sky. Lyle Henderson in the tail was methodical as always. Calm voice on the intercom even as chaos erupted around him. 4 o'clock level engaging. Damaged, he's turning away. 6 o'clock high engaging. Clean miss. He got through. They're training to get behind us, Captain. Trying to get under the tail where I can't depress the guns enough. Rob threw Hedgehog into a shallow bank. Gave Henderson the angle he needed. The tail guns roared. The German fighter pulled up hard to avoid the fire. But the maneuver cost altitude, cost energy, cost speed they couldn't afford to lose. And then the number 3 engine started coughing. Walsh saw it first. Watched the oil pressure gauge drop. Watched the cylinder head temperature spike into the danger zone. Captain number 3 is losing oil pressure. Temperature's critical. Rob scanned the gauges, saw what Walsh was seeing. The engine had been pushed too hard for too long. Maximum power for 20 minutes straight. Something inside had failed. Piston ring, maybe. Cracked cylinder. Didn't matter what. What mattered was the engine was dying. If it seized, the prop would windmill and create drag. Slow them down even more. Or worse, catch fire. Rob made the decision. Feather number 3. Shut it down. Walsh pulled the mixture to idle cutoff. Hit the feather button. The propeller blades twisted to align with the airflow. Stopped spinning. The engine went silent. Hedgehog was down to 3 engines. Slower, heavier, struggling. The German fighters saw it, saw the propeller stop, knew the bomber was wounded, pressed their attacks harder. Fritz Kemper circled at altitude, watching the damaged American bomber fight for its life. He'd been attacking for 20 minutes, had made 3 firing passes, had scored hits on the wing and fuselage, had watched his rounds punch through aluminum skin. But he hadn't gone for the kill shot, hadn't aimed for the cockpit or the fuel tanks, had told himself he was aiming for the engines, for a mission kill instead of killing the crew. Now the bomber was on 3 engines, losing altitude slowly, losing speed, falling further behind the formation every minute. Fritz could see it was doomed. Even if the German fighters stopped attacking, the bomber would never make it home, would run out of fuel over the channel, would ditch in the cold water where the crew would have maybe 10 minutes before hypothermia killed them. The smart tactical decision was to save his ammunition. Let the bomber die on its own, use his remaining cannon shells on the next raid. But Lieutenant Koch, Fritz's wingman after Otto had been forced to return to base with engine trouble, saw opportunity. Fritz will have a clear shot. Cockpit is exposed. I can end this. Fritz looked through his gun sight, saw the American bomber, saw the pilots in the cockpit, could see them clearly enough to make out details. The pilot was young, maybe Fritz's age, fighting the controls, refusing to give up. For 23 kills, Fritz had tried not to think about the men he was killing, tried to make it abstract. Aircraft not humans, targets not people. But today, watching this crew fight with such desperate courage, he couldn't maintain that fiction. He keyed his radio. Koch, break off. We're low on fuel. Time to head home. But we can finish him, I said. Break off. That's an order. Silence on the radio. Then Koch acknowledged and pulled away. Fritz took one more look at the American bomber, at the pilots who were about to die, at men who'd volunteered to fly an experimental aircraft to protect their friends, at courage that deserved respect even from an enemy. He couldn't pull the trigger, couldn't add these men to his count. Not like this. Not when they'd fought so hard. Fritz turned Red 7 toward France, toward home, toward the airfield where he would land and write in his forbidden diary about the Americans who fought like lions and the moment he chose mercy over duty. Behind him, Hedgehog limped toward the English Channel on 3 engines and prayers. 1,800 hours. Hedgehog crossed the French coast at 8,000 feet. Rob had given up trying to maintain altitude, just trying to keep the aircraft flying, keep it in the air long enough to reach England. The channel stretched out ahead. Gray water, cold enough to kill in minutes. If they had to ditch survival was unlikely. Walsh watched the fuel gauges, watched the needles drop toward empty, did calculations in his head that didn't look good. Captain, we're not going to make Alconbury. Not enough fuel. We'll have to divert to a coastal field. Rob nodded, already knew, already accepted it, just needed to keep flying. The number 2 engine started running rough, temperature climbing, oil pressure dropping. Same symptoms as number 3. Not now, please not now, but engines don't care about prayers. Number 2 coughed, sputtered, started losing power. Rob didn't wait for it to fail completely. Feathered number 2, shut it down before it could cause more problems. 2 engines, 4,000 pounds overweight, 50 miles from England. The mathematics said they wouldn't make it. The mathematics said they should bail out now while they were still over land. Let the French resistance pick them up, spend the rest of the war in hiding, or in a POW camp. But Rob looked at his crew, at men who'd trusted him, who'd volunteered because he volunteered, who deserved better than abandoning their aircraft. He looked at the pocket watch his mother had given him, thought about the promise he'd made. We're going to make it, all of us, together. Tommy Hayes climbed out of the chin turret, exhausted, bruised, hands shaking from hours of firing. He'd shot over 4,000 rounds, had driven off dozens of attacks, had done everything asked of him. He looked at Rob and asked the question everyone was thinking. Captain, are we going to make it home? Rob looked at the channel ahead, at the white cliffs of Dover, barely visible through haze. At England. At home. Yeah, Tommy, we're going home. The landing, 1813 hours. Hedgehog approached RAF Alconbury on 2 engines, no hydraulics, jam trim tabs, and fumes in the fuel tanks. Rob radioed the tower. Hedgehog inbound. Emergency landing. 2 engines. Hydraulic failure. requesting priority clearance and fire trucks. The tower responded immediately. Hedgehog, you are cleared for straight, in approach, runway 27, fire equipment standing by. Wind 260 at 8 knots. Good luck. Rob lined up on final approach. No flaps because the hydraulics were dead. Gear had to be cranked down manually. Walsh and Santos worked the emergency hand crank. 200 turns to get the wheels down and locked. Speed was too fast, 140 miles per hour. Should be 110. But without flaps, there was no way to slow down except cutting the engines. And if he cut the engines too early, they'd fall short and crash into the English countryside. Rob kept the power up, aimed for the numbers at the end of the runway, prayed the tires would hold. Hedgehog came in hot and heavy, hit the runway hard. The left main gear strut collapsed immediately. The aircraft slewed left, metal grinding on concrete, sparks showering like fireworks. Rob stood on the right rudder, fought the yaw, fought the aircraft that wanted to spin, fought physics in momentum in failure. 2,000 feet of screeching metal and burning rubber and sparks that lit up the dusk. Then Hedgehog stopped, finally stopped, sat on the runway at an angle with one collapsed gear and smoke rising from the brakes and the smell of burned metal everywhere. For a moment, nobody moved, just sat in stunned silence, processing the fact that they were alive, on the ground, in England, home. Then Walsh started laughing, hysterical relief. Tommy started crying, Ray threw up. Marcus and Jimmy just held on to each other. Rob sat with his hands still on the yoke, trembling, every muscle exhausted, every nerve fried, but alive. The hatch opened, ground crew appeared, helped them out one by one. Rob was the last to leave, stood beside Hedgehog for a moment, looked at the damage. 247 bullet holes, 2 dead engines, collapsed landing gear, hydraulic fluid pooling underneath. But his crew was alive. All of them. That's what mattered. Colonel Burke was waiting on the hard stand, walked up slowly, looked at the damaged aircraft, looked at Rob. Captain, your assessment. Rob looked at Hedgehog, at the twin-chin turret guns that had saved their lives, at the extra dorsal turret, at all 16 machine guns that had worked exactly as designed. Then he looked at the empty sky where the formation had left them behind, looked at the reality that couldn't be denied. 3 words, simple, true, final. It can't keep up. Act 6 from Failure to Legacy, August 20th, 1943, Wright Field, Ohio. The YB-40 program was officially canceled. 48 combat sorties across 7 missions. Same result every time. Once the bombers dropped their loads, the YB-40S fell behind. Every single time they fought alone. Every single time they barely made it home. Total cost $5.6 million. Combat effectiveness 0. Conclusion, catastrophic failure. The press had a field day. Headlines screamed about wasted taxpayer money, about Air Force incompetence, about boys dying while generals played with expensive toys. Rob Mitchell rotated home in July after completing his 25th mission. Got sent to Florida as a flight instructor, trained new crews, watched fresh-faced kids barely 20 years old climb into B-17's and head to England to face the same hell he'd survived. He never talked about Hedgehog, never mentioned the YB-40. When people asked about his combat experience, he kept it simple. Did my job. Got lucky. Came home. At night, he still wound his mother's pocket watch. Still thought about Charlie Peterson. Still remembered the 90 minutes fighting alone over France. Still wondered if there had been a better way. He didn't know that 800 miles away, engineers were discovering something that would change the war. The discovery, September 1943. Major Richard Lowry sat in his office at Wright Field, surrounded by combat reports. Every YB-40 mission documented in painful detail. Every failure cataloged. Every flaw exposed. The program was dead. Everyone knew it. Time to move on. Design something else. Try something new. But Lowry kept reading, kept analyzing, looking for something that might justify the $5.6 million. Something that might save the program or at least salvage some lesson from the wreckage. Then he saw it. Pattern in the data that everyone else had missed. Every YB-40 mission, every combat engagement, Every time German fighters made frontal attacks from 12 o'clock high, they broke off early, every single time. Lowry pulled out reports from standard B-17 missions, compared them to YB-40 missions. The difference was stark. Standard B-17's 40% of losses from frontal attacks. YB-40's facing frontal attacks, 0 losses. The chin turret worked. The twin 50 caliber guns mounted under the nose worked perfectly. German pilots couldn't make head-on runs without flying into a wall of tracers. The tactic that had been killing bombers by the dozens was neutralized completely. The platform had failed, but the innovation had succeeded. Lowry picked up the phone, called Boeing, asked to speak to this chief engineer on the B-17 program. What if we take just the chin turret, install it on standard B-7s? No extra weight from ammunition and armor. Just the turret, just the guns. 3 weeks later, Boeing integrated the YB-40 chin turret into their next model. The B-17G also adopted the staggered waist gun layout, also adopted the Cheyenne tail turret. 3 innovations born from failure. 3 features that would define the most successful version of the Flying Fortress ever built. December 1943. The first B-17Gs entered combat. German fighter pilots attempted their traditional frontal attacks. The chin turrets opened fire. Losses from head-on attacks dropped 71% overnight. Crews that had expected to die before completing 25 missions started making it home, started surviving, started winning. By war's end, over 8,600 B-17Gs had been built. Every single one carried the DNA of the bomber that couldn't keep up. Every single one had the chin turret that Rob Mitchell and Tommy Hayes had used to fight their way home. Conservative estimates said those chin turrets saved 4,800 American lives. 4,800 boys who made it home to their mothers, who got to grow old, who got to have families and careers and futures, all because of a $5.6 million failure. October 15th, 1988, Dayton, Ohio, 45th anniversary reunion of the 8th Air Force. Rob Mitchell, now 71 years old, walked through the hotel lobby with his wife, Sarah, retired aerospace engineer, 2 grown children, 4 grandchildren, a life well lived. The reunion was smaller every year. More empty chairs, more names on the memorial wall, more ghosts than living men. But Rob still came, still wore his uniform, still remembered. He stopped at a display case showing a restored B-17G. The placard mentioned the chin turret, mentioned how it had revolutionized bomber defense, mentioned the YB-40 program that had developed it. Rob stood there looking at those twin 50 caliber guns, remembered Tommy Hayes firing them, remembered the sound, the smoke, the desperate fight over France, an accented voice beside him. German accent, soft, old, beautiful aircraft, and terrible. I know that turret well. Rob turned, saw an older man studying the B-17 model. Gray hair, lean face, ease that had seen too much. You flew against them. The man nodded. Focke-Wulf 190, Jagdgeschwader 26, Friedrich Kemper. Everyone called me Fritz. Rob felt his heart stop, felt time compress, felt 45 years disappear. What dates did you serve? Fritz looked at him, really looked at him, seeing not just an old man, but something familiar, something remembered. 41 to 45, U-43, B-17 pilot, 92nd Bomb Group. Fritz went very still. May to July 43. Rob nodded slowly. Yes. How did you know? Fritz pulled out a photograph. Old, faded. Showed a Focke-Wulf 190 with the number 7 painted on the side. Showed a young pilot standing beside it. Saint Nazaire, May 29th. There was a strange bomber. Many guns. Fought like a lion. Rob felt the world shift. Felt reality bend. It took him a moment to find his voice. Hedgehog. That was my aircraft. The YB-40. Fritz's eyes widened. You. It was you. They stood there in the hotel lobby. 2 old men, former enemies, men who had tried to kill each other 45 years ago, men who had survived when so many others hadn't. I attacked you 5 times that day, Fritz said quietly. Hit your aircraft, damaged your wing. Rob nodded. I remember. One of your pilots we shot down. Young kid. Otto. Fritz shook his head. Otto was my wingman. He survived the war. Died in '79. Cancer. The young pilot was Hans Muller. He survived too, lives in Hamburg now. They were silent for a moment, processing, remembering, grieving for all the years and all the dead. Your gunship failed as a weapon, yes? Fritz asked. Complete failure. Couldn't keep up with the formation after they dropped their bombs. But the nose guns, Rob smiled sadly, saved the war. They put them on every B-17G, changed everything. Fritz nodded slowly. Your failure killed more of us than your success would have. I stopped making frontal attacks after the G models appeared. Too dangerous. Had to find new tactics. Rob looked at this man who had tried to kill him. This man who had lost his sister. This man who had fought for his homeland while Rob fought for his. I'm sorry. For your friends. For your family. And I'm sorry, Fritz replied, for trying to kill you. For your friends I succeeded against. They shook hands. Held on longer than necessary. Two old warriors finding peace. Can I buy you coffee? Rob asked. Real American coffee. Fritz smiled. Not burnt acorns. The real thing. And maybe some bacon, if you can stand it. Fritz laughed. In the POW camp after I was captured, they gave us bacon for breakfast. I thought it would be terrible. American food, you know what we'd been told. And best thing I ever tasted. Been eating it ever since. They walked to the hotel restaurant together, sat and drank coffee and ate bacon and talked for 3 hours. About the war, about their families, about the men they'd been and the men they'd become, about failure and success and how sometimes they're the same thing. The YB-40 flying destroyer never won a battle, never achieved its mission, never lived up to its promise. But the innovation born from that failure saved thousands of lives. The chin turret, the improved defensive armament, the lessons learned about weight and performance, and the difference between what works on paper and what works in combat. Rob Mitchell died in 1996, 79 years old, surrounded by family. His mother's pocket watch passed to his grandson. Fritz Kemper died in 2001, 86 years old. His forbidden diary donated to a German war museum, a record of one man's struggle to maintain honor in a dishonorable war. They remained friends for 13 years. Letters, phone calls, one visit to Germany where Rob met Fritz's family, one visit to Ohio where Fritz saw the wheat fields where Rob had grown up. Two men who had tried to kill each other, who had found something better than victory, who had found understanding. The lesson isn't that failure is acceptable. The lesson is that failure, when examined honestly, when learned from deeply, when transformed through courage and innovation, can become the foundation of something greater. Every B-17G that flew over Germany carried the legacy of a bomber that couldn't keep up. Every crew that made it home owed their lives to an experiment that failed. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from what works, but from understanding why something doesn't work and having the courage to try again differently. That's the American way. Not perfection, not easy success, but persistence, innovation, the willingness to fail forward. The YB-40 proved that even our disasters can leave behind legacies worth remembering. And two old enemies proved that even war can eventually lead to peace. If this story moved you, we want to hear from you. Share it with someone who needs to hear about courage and failure and redemption. Tell us in the comments about the veterans in your family, about the promises they made and kept, about the sacrifices that bought our freedom. Because these stories matter. These men mattered. Their courage, their failure, their innovation, their friendship across the divide of war, all of it matters. Remember them, honor them, learn from them. And never forget that sometimes the bomber that couldn't keep up carries the most important lesson of all.